Tonight at 10, thousands of people take to the streets of Manchester on a day of solidarity and defiance. Remembering the 22 victims of Monday's bombing, the city came together for the Great Northern Run to show it won't be defeated by terror.
It's been obviously an exceptionally difficult week for everybody, but what Greater Manchester is saying, this place will get through it and we'll go forward together.
There were more raids and arrests today in the investigation. 13 people are now in custody. We'll have the very latest live from Manchester, also tonight. Misery for BA passengers as more flights are cancelled and delayed because of a global computer crash.
I've never seen anything like it in my life. We've always flown BA, we've always been happy with BA, but now, no. We've said, I don't think we can trust them again.
Good evening. The victims of the Manchester terror attack have been remembered in church services across the city today and on the streets as thousands of people took part in the Great Manchester Run. Amid tight security, the organisers say they were determined it should go ahead to show the true spirit of the city, that terrorism will never win. Our correspondent Chris Buckler reports now from Manchester.
In the centre of Manchester, tens of thousands ran in remembrance and in defiance. Holding this race just days after a suicide bomb attack was in itself sending a message.
It's been obviously an exceptionally difficult week for everybody, but what Greater Manchester is saying, this place will get through it and we'll go forward together.
The simple act of gathering together after a bombing that left so many families grieving expressed a sentiment that only a few could find the words for.
Do something through courage and through pain. Do something for someone that you care for. Do something to help out with the cost. Do something for someone that you're there for. Do something for someone that you've lost.
Yet this attempt to return to normality exposed what has become, at least for the moment, the new normal. Armed officers and extra security are now an obvious presence, here to offer reassurance, but they're also a reminder of what happened in Manchester less than a week ago.
Yeah, I was a bit nervous because I'm here with my husband. If anything else could have happened, you know, I've got children at home, so I did think twice, not going to lie, but I'm here.
People paid their respects all along the race route. And at services nearby in Manchester Cathedral.
So today we remember Megan Hurley, Elaine McIver, Courtney Boyle, Philip Tron.
There the names of each one of the 22 people killed on Monday were read out.
Sorrel Luxowski, Chloe Rutherford, Liam Curry, Michelle Kiss, Nell Jones.
The family and friends of one of them, Martin Hett, celebrated his life this evening in Stockport. For them, like so many others, trying to move on means remembering, not forgetting. And that leaves Manchester a city still in need of both support and reassurance. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Manchester.
Well, police investigating the Manchester Arena attack carried out by Salman Abedi have made a further series of raids and arrests around the city. 2 more people are now in custody, meaning that a total of 13 are being held for questioning. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons has the latest.
This massive police operation continued at a frantic pace today. 1,000 officers and police staff are involved. The arrests continued. A man pulled from his car in the middle of the street in Trafford. A raid on a house in the Moss Side area. Heavily armed police arrested 3 men, at one point bringing in a police dog. Roads were closed. But later the police announced all those arrested had been released, despite the door to their home being blown from its hinges with explosives. Their family insisted we had nothing to do with the arena bombing. in this area in particular, the police operation is causing enormous unrest.
We don't want anything like this in our community. It's just so ridiculous. I am annoyed right now, and it's not nice. It's not a nice feeling at all.
People here worry there'll be a backlash. In fact, this operation has touched many communities in this city. The explosions and the guns are unnerving, but life does go on. 12 remain in custody, and more arrests are expected. Tom Simons, BBC News, Manchester.
Well, let's join Chris Buckler live in Manchester now. Chris, what are the police now saying about the state of the investigation?
Well, more than a dozen people being questioned, more than a dozen locations being searched. They continue to appeal for information. They continue to ask people for help in identifying CCTV footage and giving them more information about the bomber themselves. However, beyond that, they have also released an unusual statement tonight, thanking people for their kindness and support. And that goes for the way that they've been treating strangers, as well as the way they've been treating the emergency services. A real sense of solidarity.
Indeed, those scenes of solidarity and togetherness that we saw from your report earlier on the great Manchester run, they were extraordinary.
Yeah, and you get a real sense that although this has been an emotional day for Manchester, it's not just been tears. It has also been laughter and cheers. This is a city that is determined to show its resilience, and you'll find that no more so than here in St Anne's Square. Behind me, the number of balloons, the flowers, the messages of solidarity, they just continue to grow. And while this city gets back to normal and the hustle and bustle continues in the streets all around here, this place remains quiet and calm. It is a place to remember. And if one thing has been clear today, is that people here in Manchester are determined to remember.
Chris, many thanks for that. Chris Buckler live in Manchester. And both the Conservatives and Labour have been focusing on national security today in the election campaign. The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, reaffirmed that the Conservatives would set up a commission to promote British values and tackle extremism, while Labour wants to recruit 1,000 security experts in addition to 10,000 extra police. Here's our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth.
In the aftermath of such an atrocity, inevitable questions about how to stop something like this happening again. The actions of this man, Salman Abedi, forced a pause in the election campaign. Now, preventing others like him is part of the debate. The Home Secretary said today the government had, for the first time, used powers to prevent suspected terrorists returning freely to the UK. On the Manchester attack, she said police and security services were working at full tilt. With questions about who knew what and when, she was asked about reports that friends and community leaders had raised concerns about the man behind it.
Was Salman Abedi on a surveillance list?
I don't know those details that you've just set out to me because the intelligence services are still collecting information about him and about the people around him. But I wouldn't rush to conclusions, as you seem to be, that they've somehow missed something.
I'm simply saying that people had phoned the terror hotline, as they're told to do.
As they should do, as they should do. And this, you know, the reason we've put in place the terror hotline, the reason we've put in place the prevent strategy is because we recognise the scale of the problem.
So what would different parties do to tackle that problem? Well, the Conservatives would introduce a counter-extremism commission. So far short on detail, it'll advise on new laws and policies. They say they've committed extra funding for counter-terrorism agencies and are recruiting more security officers. Labour too has promised more security and intelligence staff and 10,000 more police officers, as well as more prison and border agency personnel. In the battle for power here, Labour are attacking the Conservatives over cuts, saying they've left police under-resourced. The Tories are defending their record on crime, but like so much in this election, want to make this about character and leadership. The Shadow Home Secretary was asked again today about past comments she'd made, seemingly supportive of the IRA.
It was 34 years ago. I had a rather splendid afro at the time. I don't have the same hairstyle. And I don't have the same views.
Labour says the focus now should be how to keep people safe from this, an attack which, rather than undermine a democratic system, has highlighted the choice the country's facing. Who's best to lead? Who's best to protect? Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Westminster.
Thousands of British Airways passengers have faced a second day of disruption following a global IT failure. Flights from Gatwick are getting back to normal, but a third of BA services from Heathrow were cancelled. That's because of the knock-on effects around the world of yesterday's disruption. BA passengers in Rome have been told they won't be able to fly back to the UK until Tuesday. Well, Joe Lynham is at Heathrow for us tonight. Joe.
Yeah, thanks. Good evening, Clive. It's been a day of queues, cancellations and questionable customer care. Hundreds of BA passengers are still in the terminal trying to catch their delayed flights. Thousands have had their holidays curtailed or ruined. The airline says things are getting back to normal, but for many people, today didn't feel like normal. For some BA customers, it had been a long and uncomfortable night. Bleary passengers this morning still hoping to catch their plane. Even free bottles of water in a heavily congested Terminal 5 failed to cool some people's mood.
It's just a lot of moving around, standing in lines, and lack of information. I think it's too big that they don't know what to do about it.
We've been in the line for about 5 hours now. We have no idea how much longer we'll be here, and we're getting no communication from the staff.
Sarah Booth and her family should be on holiday in Budapest. Instead, she's stuck having lunch in a pub near Heathrow. She was told by BA to come to the airport, only to find out that the flight was cancelled.
We only travelled based on the fact that our flight was still running. So we've been told by BA to make sure that all flights were running before you left home. So we did that.
And you've come from?
We've come from Morven in Worcestershire, and my sister and her family have come from Folkestone in Kent.
BA passengers in Rome have been told it might be Tuesday before they get home. Some travelled here by train from Naples after spending hours on a plane there yesterday that never took off.
We've now been booked on a flight from here to Barcelona, Barcelona to London, but our Barcelona flight has been delayed an hour, so now we've got 30 minutes to get the connecting flight in the hope that we get back to London tonight. Otherwise, we've got to wait 2 days.
As thousands of people waited in a packed Heathrow, dozens of flights were cancelled and many more will not depart as the airline struggled to reset its global network after a major power failure. And that, for some aviation insiders, is inexcusable.
What seems remarkable is there was no backup system kicking in within minutes of the whole system failing, and there wasn't even a third backup. Businesses of this size need systems backed up all the time, and that's what passengers expect and rely on.
But confusion still abounds. Some passengers have been told their flight is cancelled online and then get the exact opposite message when they call the airline to confirm. This problem looks set to persist for far more than just a few hours.
So, Joe, still lots of problems and, as you say, confusion. Is BA giving clear advice to passengers tonight?
Well, we have asked for interviews with BA to clarify what has gone on over the last 2 days, and they have not put anyone up. The Chief Executive, Alex Cruz, did post a video message today and yesterday in which he apologised to customers once again for the chaos and said his team were pulling out all the stops to get things back to normal. Now, he urged passengers not to come to the airport unless they have a confirmed booking for their flight, not to come to the airport earlier than 90 minutes before take-up time, and to always check the Manage My Booking part of BA.com. But this is going to have a major, this is going to have an issue for BA going forward. Not just the financial cost of the compensation here, but the reputational damage. We saw people saying that I'm never going to fly BA again, so they're going to have to work very hard to kind of put this back on an even keel going forward.
OK, Joe, thank you. Joe Lynham there at Heathrow. Now, a man's been shot dead in a supermarket car park in County Down. The victim, who was 55, was hit several times as he got out of his car at Sainsbury's in Bangor. Hundreds of shoppers were in the area at the time. Northern Ireland Police have launched a murder inquiry. 6 men who accused the late Lord Janner of sexually abusing them as children have abandoned their civil case. He was charged with 22 sexual offences dating back to the 1960s, but the 87-year-old was found unfit to stand trial just days before he died in 2015. His accusers had been seeking damages from his estate. Now, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has refused any possibility of an alliance with the Scottish National Party if there's a hung parliament on June the 8th. The leader of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon, had said in an interview today that she would consider what she called a progressive alliance with Mr Corbyn, despite having reservations about his leadership and policies. He's been campaigning in Glasgow tonight, from where our Scotland editor Sarah Smith reports.
Jeremy Corbyn is clearly enthused by polls that suggest increasing support for Labour. As he promises higher public spending, he says the Tories are trying to hide cuts in a dishonest manifesto.
And that means there's a risk to the quality of public services. Not my words, that's the damning verdict of the Institute of Fiscal Studies.
But the IFS have also taken aim at Labour's manifesto.
Now, you know, the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said that your tax plans will not raise as much money as you think they might. If that were to be the case, would you choose to raise taxes or cut public spending?
What they've said is that there's a gap between what we've said we would raise and what they believe could be raised from existing taxes. What they haven't taken into consideration is the effectiveness of transaction taxes, which we want to bring in, and also offshore property taxes that we want to bring in. We believe they will raise the money that is necessary.
The city of Glasgow always used to be known as an absolutely rock-solid Labour heartland. What's happened to the party here is a good illustration of what's happened right across Scotland. Until recently, every Glasgow MP was Labour. Then, in the 2015 election, they lost every seat in the city to the SNP. Now, not even their most optimistic campaigners believe they're likely to win any of them back again in this election. Labour are now fighting to keep the one single MP they have in Scotland, maybe add a couple more to keep him company. At a vintage fair in the East End of Glasgow, I spoke to voters who'd switched between Labour and the SNP in the past.
I really like Corbyn's manifesto. I like his attitude and his beliefs and what he stands for.
Could Labour tempt you back?
Not with Jeremy Corbyn.
The more I'm listening to Jeremy Corbyn now, the more I believe that he speaks from the heart.
Will you vote for him?
No, I'm seriously thinking about voting for him, yeah.
Tonight, the SNP leader said she would consider a coalition with Labour.
If there was to be a hung parliament, of course we would look to be part of a progressive alliance that pursued progressive policies. But let's get back to the reality of this election. The reality of this election, even with a narrowing of the polls, is that we're going to face a Tory government, perhaps with a bigger majority. So my priority in this election is to say to people in Scotland, if you want Scotland's interests to be protected and our voice heard, then you've got to vote SNP to make sure that's the case.
Hi guys, you're right.
Jeremy Corbyn says no coalitions, no pacts with anyone. He insists he believes he can win this election outright. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, if there's one thing all the parties seem to agree on, it's that the UK housing market is in crisis. Some believe it's actually broken, with the supply of homes failing to keep up with demand. All the major parties are pledging to help both renters and buyers. And as part of our reality check series on the key issues in the run-up to the election, Steph McGovern investigates the problems with housing.
Having a place to call home is a dream for a lot of people. But does it matter if you own it or not?
Home ownership is now at its lowest level since 1985, whereas private renting is at its highest since the 1980s. Now that's partly because it's much harder now to save for a deposit. So if you look back at the 90s, it would take an average household 3 years if they were saving 5% of their income every year to get a deposit together. Now it would take 20 years. Well, let's get some thoughts on this with my cleverly placed mic. We've got Mark and Steph here. Mark, I'm pleased to say you've just bought your first home. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Was it hard getting the money together?
It did take a number of years to save up for the deposit for the house, and I've been very fortunate that I have my parents and my partner's parents to chip in for the deposit as well. Without that, we wouldn't have been able to get a home.
Yeah, banking mum and dad makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Steph, for you, you're renting at the moment. Can you see a day when you can buy a home? Is that what you want to do?
Yeah, I'd like to buy eventually, but I think at the same time as renting, it's quite difficult to save for a deposit. So it's going to take a while.
Yeah. When do you reckon you'll be able to buy?
At least maybe like 10 years.
So although renting can provide flexibility for people like Steph, things can be tough for Generation Rent. Over the last 6 years, rents have been going up much faster than wages. Now the gap between the two has grown to 15%, which means keeping up with rising rents can be really tough.
David, you're a housing provider. There's people out there who don't necessarily want to own their own home.
There are people who want to rent. For every home we let, there's 120 people, 150 people want to rent it. So there's loads of people want to rent. But also that's not what we offer. We offer people opportunities to buy, and we've got this new scheme called Rent to Buy. So you rent to begin with, and then you can buy it after 5 years, and you pay less than the market rent at the beginning.
Yeah, so there are options out there. David, thank you very much. If you take the UK's low-paid workforce, so perhaps people in jobs like hairdressing, security, factory workers, then according to research by Shelter, 15 hours of their working week is spent solely to pay their rent. So that's 3 hours of every day slogging it just to keep a roof over their head. And Kate, this is all about affordability, isn't it?
Absolutely. People's rents are just completely out of step with their wages now, and people are really struggling to keep up with that kind of rent. You know, we've also found that people are having to borrow, getting into debt, putting on loans and credit cards just to pay the rent. They can't afford to save, which means of course they've got very little hope of putting a deposit aside and buying a place of their own. There's just generally a real big problem between what people are earning and how much they have to pay in rent.
And it puts a lot of pressure on them. Kate, thank you very much. There's also quite a generational difference. So just under half of 24 to 35-year-olds rent privately. Now that's almost double when you compare it to what it was 10 years ago.
With buying down and renting up, owning a home is less of a realistic aspiration for many. Instead, it looks like we could be moving to more of a German model of living, where renting is seen as the norm. Steph McGovern, BBC News, Manchester.
And now, with all the sport, here's Carthy Nanaya-Seagram at the BBC Sports Centre. Hi there, Carthy.
Hello, Clive. Good evening. The second Grand Slam of the tennis season started today, but it is already over for the top seed, Angelique Kerber. She became the first women's world #1 to be knocked out of the French Open in the first round. Britain's Dan Evans is also out, but a fan's favourite, Petra Kvitova, made a triumphant return to the sport. Patrick Geary reports.
And yet here she was, caught Philippe Chatrier, opponent Julia Bozerup. First game, first point.
And what a start!
First class. Kvitova's hand is...
Welcome to Chatrier, and my team was there, my family was there, everyone who helped me. I mean, it wasn't really about the game today.
Next on court, Angelique Kerber, officially the world's best, but currently, in reality, far from it. Such is her lack of form that her defeat to Ekaterina Makarova was a strangely unsurprising surprise. Britain's Dan Evans started strongly against Tommy Robredo. He went to set up, but Robredo's roots are in clay and he eventually blossomed. The British challenge in Paris will have to come from elsewhere. Patrick Geary, BBC News.
Sebastian Vettel has provided Ferrari with their first victory at the Monaco Grand Prix in 16 years, while Lewis Hamilton finished in 7th place after starting in 13th on the grid. Vettel's victory extended his World Championship lead over Hamilton to 25 points, but Jenson Button's one-off return to Formula One for McLaren ended after a collision. It's time to pop out of the room if you don't want to know today's football results, as Sports Scene follows soon on BBC One in Scotland. Hamilton Academical have retained their Scottish Premiership status after beating Dundee United 1-0 in the second leg of their playoff final. Greg Doherty, who has been at Hamilton since he was 8 years old, scored their winner. Sir Ben Ainsley's Great Britain team have lost both of their races today in the qualifying stages of sailing's America's Cup in Bermuda. They are in second place in the table of 6 teams after mistakes in races against the USA and New Zealand today. Their aim, though, is to become the first British crew to win the prestigious competition. Qualifying continues tomorrow. Golf, and Alexander Noren has won the PGA Championship at Wentworth by 2 shots. The Swede's final round of 62, that's 10 under par, broke Wentworth's West Course record, and Noren described it as one of the best rounds of his career. England's rugby union side have beaten the Barbarians in their final match before heading on tour to Argentina next month. Eddie Jones's team won by 28 points to 14 at Twickenham, with Nathan Earl scoring the pick of England's tries. And that's all the sport for now. Clive.
Carthy, thank you. And that's it. You can see more on all of today's stories on the BBC News channel, but do stay with us on BBC One. It's now time for all the news where you are. Have a very good night.